In this video, I will show you how to make these soft and chewy peanut butter cookies, and we'll be making these peanut butter cookies entirely from scratch. In a large mixing bowl, we're going to add 1 cup of all-purpose flour. The flour should be spooned and leveled. And then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of baking soda. The baking soda will help the cookies to spread while they're in the oven, as well as give them that pretty darker brown color. And I just added a ½ teaspoon of iodized salt. And now I'm giving the dry ingredients a good whisk until they're well combined. By the way, I tested this recipe with a ½ teaspoon of baking soda, and the cookies came out a bit too pale for my liking, so that's why I opted to increase the amount of baking soda to 1 teaspoon instead. So now that all the dry ingredients are well combined, I'm bringing over a small bowl, and in this small bowl I have a ½ cup of unsalted butter and a ½ cup of creamy peanut butter, and I'm going to melt this in the microwave before we combine it with our wet ingredients. But now I'm going to bring over the separate bowl for the wet ingredients, and I've melted the butter and peanut butter off camera. I'm going to add it to the larger mixing bowl right now. Now the reason I melted the peanut butter is because you'll find that it is much easier to incorporate the sugar with the melted peanut butter versus if it was still in a more solidified state. And we're going to add the last of that peanut butter into the bowl right now. And then we're going to move that bowl out of the way. And now we're going to move on to adding our sugar. So there I just added a ½ cup of white granulated sugar. Now I'm going to add a ½ cup of light brown sugar. The light brown sugar will help to neutralize the metallic taste in the baking soda that we added earlier. And I just added a tablespoon of honey as well. This will give the cookies a bit more complexity in terms of flavor. So now I'm whisking the butter and sugar together until they're well combined. And this took me about 60 seconds to do so. And next I'm going to move on to adding the egg yolks. So for this recipe I'm adding 4 extra large egg yolks. I excluded the egg whites because the egg whites contain protein, and that protein will tend to dry out the cookies as they bake. And now I'm going to add a ½ teaspoon of vanilla extract before I finish mixing in those egg yolks. And then I'm going to whisk everything for another 30 seconds or so. And just a fair warning, between the stabilizers and the peanut butter and the honey that we added, these wet ingredients will get thick and sticky very fast. That's why I recommend moving quickly during this step in the process. Otherwise, it will become difficult trying to stir these wet ingredients. And now that we've finished combining all the wet ingredients, I'm going to move that bowl out of the way and bring over the bowl with the dry ingredients. And we're going to proceed with folding the wet ingredients into the bowl with the dry ingredients. And you do have to be very careful doing this step. You should only fold the wet and dry ingredients together until they're just combined. When I say just combined, I mean just until the flour is no longer visible. If you end up overworking the dough, then that will lead to gluten development, and the cookies will not bake properly once you bake them in the oven as a result of the gluten development. So with the wet and dry ingredients now just combined, I'm going to add in 3/4 cups of peanut butter chips. And I'm going to fold these into the dough again until just combined. And these chips are going to give the cookies what I would call a double peanut butter effect. And what I mean by that is the maintenance of distinct peanut butter pockets throughout the cookies will give them a more intense peanut butter taste. So now that the chips have been just combined with the dough, I'm going to proceed with placing the dough onto our cookie sheet. I line my cookie sheet with parchment paper, and I recommend you do the same as well. If you were to just grease the cookie sheet, you risk having the bottom and the edges of the cookies overcook and burn. Meanwhile, if you were to just place the cookie dough onto a clean cookie sheet, you risk having the bottom of the cookies stick to the cookie sheet. So I'm going to bake these cookies in a preheated oven at 350 degrees for 10 minutes. And once the cookies are done, I'm going to allow them to cool for at least 10 minutes. And you don't want to mess with the cookies before they cool because they will continue to set as they cool. If you were to try to mess with them too soon, they will tend to fall apart. And the nice part about these peanut butter cookies, unlike with most recipes, there's no need to flatten out the dough with a spatula or your hand before you place them in the oven, because they will spread out perfectly fine on their own as they bake, as you can see in the video. And as long as these cookies are stored in an airtight container or bag, they should be good for up to 3 to 5 days. Once you get beyond 5 days, I would recommend discarding the cookies. As far as being able to freeze the dough should be perfectly fine for at least 1 month in the freezer. Once you get beyond 1 month, the flavor and texture of the cookies will start to worsen. And once you reach the 3-month period, I would recommend discarding the cookie dough entirely. And finally, as far as servings, assuming you use a 2 tablespoon or 1 ounce cookie scoop, as I did in this video, you should be able to squeeze at least 15 cookies out of this recipe. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to see more of these recipes, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.